If you own a copy of David Banks's 1988 book, simply titled Cybermen, you may have looked curiously at this image of our solar system. But it is not our solar system as we know it. This, distinguished followers, is the ancient cosmology of Mondas, our solar system intertwined with the fictitious legacy of the cyber race. Observe the bewildering differences between what we thought we knew about our solar system and what this ancient interstellar map shows us. Our own precious moon orbits the planet Mercury, and is soon to be flung out of orbit and propelled with devastating effect towards the double planet system of Mondas and Earth. Between Mars and Jupiter orbits the planet Asteros, known to a few select human beings on Earth as Fendel. Really, that's in this? Okay. And on the outer reaches of our solar system, beyond the fabled world of Penultima, lies the mysterious planet 14. Oh yep, it's the big one, folks. Grab yourselves a snack. Chosen Chimp here. For Doctor Who's audience in the late 1960s, the Cybermen cemented their spot as the second most iconic Doctor Who monster across the span of just 3 years. 3 seasons, 2 Doctors, 5 Cybermen stories and 4 crucial incarnations. But in the realm of fiction, it was a tale of survival and conquest spanning centuries, and carried out sporadically across the solar system and beyond by numerous factions of Cybermen who would operate a lot of the time in spite of one another. As is my running observation in all of my Cybermen videos, classic Doctor Who fans have 2 choices. Watch Doctor Who and enjoy it, or watch Doctor Who and enjoy it and try to make sense of the sporadic timeline of cyber activity in classic Who, which is so confusing that it might not even be worth it if Mr. Cyber Controller himself, David Banks, didn't do such a wonderfully inspiring job of making sense of it all in book and audio form. Particularly when it comes to the invasion, I implore those who haven't done so already to get your loaf around the David Banks timeline, because how else do you explain that the last Cybermen story for 7 whole years is actually the first Cybermen story? From the perspective of planet Earth. 1968's The Invasion was set in the 1970s, 4 years after The Web of Fear, which was set in 1969, making this 1973, which throws the real-time adventures of the Pertwee era out of whack, and so writers paid a heavy price for making a throwaway timestamp, which other later writers sought to contextualise. I know the feeling. Good job this is Doctor Who and that continuity is reshuffled on a regular basis as standard anyway, which is fine, because this is a show involving a not very responsible time traveller constantly mucking around with our world, and I mean constantly. So what do you expect? What's that you say? Nobody remembers that giant Cyber King roaming 1950s London? Because of you, that's why. Okay, let me try again. 1968's The Invasion was set in the 1970s, before the events of the 10th Planet in 1986, before the events of the Moon Base and the Wheel in Space, both of which were set in the 21st century, and a whopping 500 years before the events of the Tomb of the Cybermen, and so on and so forth. And I am of course excluding the whole wiping out the dinosaurs thing from Earthshock, whatever the Silver Nemesis was meant to be, and that thing with the tunnels in the 80s in Attack of the Cybermen. We just have to deal with one thing at a time here. So let's step out of that murky realm of fiction for a controlled length of time. There was one thing that Doctor Who audiences in the 1960s could be certain of. It was only inevitable that there would eventually be a story where the Cybermen invade planet Earth, like when the Daleks invaded Earth, but with Cybermen. By the time the Moon Base was broadcast, which was only a year and a half earlier, the Cybermen were a certified success story for Doctor Who. Audiences went bananas for these guys. Creative masterminds behind the Cybermen, Kit Pedler and Jerry Davies, had hit a home run. And following the Tomb of the Cybermen, these 2 writers no longer had a direct involvement in the development of new Cybermen adventures. But this did not stop Doctor Who's latter production production team from using ideas submitted to them by Kit Pedler, who was now working with Jerry Davis on stuff other than Doctor Who. The Wheel in Space was written by David Whittaker, from a story developed by Kit Pedler, and The Invasion was written by future producer Derek Sherwin, also from a story submitted by Kit Pedler. This story was titled Return of the Cybermen. The synopsis told of the Cybermen using a giant computer company to assist them in the invasion of Earth. And so you got a Cybermen TV adventure that was vastly different to all the others. No bases on the moon, no space stations, no distant planets. Sit back, stick your fingers in your ears and wail in terror because the Cybermen are coming to us. And would you just take a look at these fellas? Like you haven't seen them already. Over the course of my Cybermen videos, I have expressed my love for the appearances of the Mondasians and the Cybertelosians in plentiful amounts. And I've also acknowledged that while the Wheelies aren't a universal favourite, they were definitely a step in the right direction for making the Cybermen look more like Cybermen. But just to don my subjective hat here, and I hope you're wearing yours too, I can officially declare that this is my all-time favourite Cyberman design. I love this look so much. For a start off, I think it's easily the creepiest, and that's mostly down to the face. It's not as overbearingly monstrous as the big round eyes of the Telosians and the Mondasians, just a simple line and two dots. Its blankness really evoking that lack of emotional content, with only the iconic teardrop as a defining characteristic. The weird cat's tongue thingy from the Wheelies was a goner. Few complained. The head blocks either side were a brand new addition and somehow added a bulkier quality to the appearance of these creatures, which to me makes them as physically intimidating as they are unnerving, a great deal more so than any design previous. I consider this the perfect nightmare fuel of Cyberman design, and it's pretty simple when you look at it. I think the 80s design is cool, if a little overcooked, and I'm a fan of all the designs in modern Who, but that's just a different thing, innit? All the other renditions from other media and fan art, great stuff, but this is the Cyberman's Cyberman and everything is just right. I think it also embodies 3 years of honing in what a specific idea should eventually look like, even though the actual history is a little more complex. Alongside having Kit Pedler and Jerry Davis, the team for the first 3 Cybermen adventures were helmed by producer Inez Lloyd, and the appearance of the Cybermen in those stories were brought to fruition by the superbly talented costume designer Sandra Reed. But that team was out of the picture after Tomb of the Cybermen, and replaced with new producer Peter Bryant. Some new directors and writers were added, and also brought into the team was new costume designer Martin Bow, who, no pun intended, reinvented the wheel of Cybermen designs as originally overseen by Sandra Reed. This design was then refined for the Invasion by another costume designer, Bobby Bartlett. It makes sense then that there is a bit of a jump from this to this, but then this being a bit of a tune-up, albeit a highly effective one. Besides the significant improvement to the head, the body's chest pieces were smaller and more streamlined. I mean, look at that compared to that. Largely because it meant the actors could work with more agility. For the first time in history, we had a cyber army that looked like an army. These were soldiers, and there were lots of them. They marched, and they were armed with an assortment of weaponry. They even had operable lights on the chest pieces and the heads. And in general, I just love how thoroughly shiny they are. I guess the only thing I don't much care for is the way they speak. Maybe just a little bit too squeaky, and just not as cool as the Telosian predecessors. But they do make up for it by, well, rarely speaking at all. They do, however, blurt the occasional sonic squawk of discomfort, particularly during the battle scenes, a noise which is much more becoming of them. For the Invasion, a total of 7 Cybermen suits were made, and you get plenty of clever shots and editing to evoke the sense that there was a great deal more. To this day, this is without doubt the most iconic Cyberman design of all time. And there is, of course, the small matter of Revenge of the Cybermen. And to the untrained eye, it might seem like the Cybermen in that story are identical to the Cybermen in The Invasion. But you know better than that, and I know better than that. They're completely different. They're not the same at all. Little gun things on their heads, the bulgy handles that they've got, the general shapes of the attachments to their body are different too. Not the same. Completely different. Now, here is a question that I would like you to answer in the comments. Is The Invasion the last really good Cybermen story of classic Doctor Who? I'm not saying I think it is, but I do think it's a conversation worth having. Possibly. Revenge of the Cybermen is, after all, the birth of these more emotional, chatty, hand-gestury Cybermen. And which do you prefer? Tell me in the comments. And let's talk about The Invasion. The story where the Cybermen went all out. Where they almost conquered planet Earth. And their directive was to convert or to kill. Did you know you can support The Chosen Chimp on Patreon? For just £1 a month, you can become a distinguished follower, and you can request a classic Doctor Who story for me to review. Maybe just skim through the channel and check that it isn't a story I haven't done already. Cybermen stories, well, as you can see, I'm doing that now. And Dalek stories, well, I did say I was gonna do that once you got me to the 50 Patreon mark. But you know what? I'm really, really desperate to make that Dalek video. So I'm going to change it to 20. Just 20 Patreons. And I'll do it. We're almost there, guys. But I need your help. £1 a month. Distinguished follower. Patreon.com/chosenchimp. And in the meantime, let's get talking about The Invasion. This is a... I haven't trespassed here. You are actually allowed to walk here, even though I got this above my head, which is very disconcerting. And what's that noise? Weird cybery klaxon noise. Anybody else hear that? If you want to dive deep into The Invasion, there is a great deal more to talk about than just the Cybermen. It was a culmination of a lot of things in TV Doctor Who. Series 6 was the final season of the Patrick Troughton era, and also the black and white era, and the end of the 1960s, the decade which birthed this great institution. And a while ago I made a video about how the final episode of the War Games closed off this era of Doctor Who in a brilliantly rounded fashion. The Invasion, which was the midpoint of the same series, is a climax of a different kind. It closes off some of the plot points established in previous Troughton stories and really hammered in the idea of recurring characters outside of Doctor Who villains and companions. Firstly, it references Professor Travers, who was a key character in The Abominable Snowmen and The Web of Fear. When the Doctor lands on Earth in this story and finds that all is not well, he naturally thinks of calling on that guy's help, which makes sense. Professor Travers was actually meant to be in this story, but then he wasn't. But the fact that they even just mentioned his name showed some valuable consideration for audiences' expectations. But more importantly, The Invasion saw the return of this sprightly young colonel, with an inquisitive mind and zero hesitation to lob a grenade at anything that looked otherworldly. Lethbridge Stewart had now gone up in the world. After taking the fight to an army of robot Yeti, he took charge of an independent intelligence group to deal specifically with extraterrestrial threats, the United Nations Intelligence Task Force. With several noisy alien terrors threatening to invade already, planet Earth was finally ready to defend itself, now with a military outlet custom built for the Doctor Who universe, and what more of an opening challenge than an army of Cybermen. Not only does the birth of units show some active story development for the interaction between planet Earth and extraterrestrial threats in Doctor Who, but it also laid the groundwork for what classic Doctor Who would look like going forwards. To say that the invasion was important is an understatement, and with this being the last of Cybermen stories for a goodly amount of time, it could be considered a finale of sorts for these silver horrors and their undying quest to invade the Earth, but it's also the beginning of a brand new era of Doctor Who. The invasion consists of 8 episodes, 2 of which are currently missing. For the 2 missing eps, you can watch the animated recreations, which are always fun, I enjoy the little Easter eggs, or you can check out the loose canon edits, but I wouldn't stress too much. Episodes 1 and 4 don't really have the best bits, and no Cybermen footage that isn't repeated in the next episode. Yep, you heard me. For this 8-part story, the Cybermen don't show for the first 4 episodes, except for a moving blanket, a cliffhanger at the end of episode 4, and the mysterious new cyber coordinator at the end of the first episode. The reason for this is that the Cybermen reveal was meant to be a big secret, with the title of the story giving nothing away. Who's invading? Watch and you'll see. A surprise likely ruined as always by press pictures in the Radio Times. You know, I've watched The Invasion a bunch of times and I'm still trying to decide if 8 episodes is necessary and if the 4-episode build works. As this is a global threat the likes present day Earth has never seen, it probably does deserve an expansive dive into the events leading up to the Cybermen invasion, though I'm not sure that is always what we actually get. Cybermen have rarely been shown in the opening episodes, but I would argue that 4 is a little excessive. I do wonder if some plot points were obvious filler that could have just been cut to trim the first half of this act down a bit. And you might think I'm talking about Zoe cackling like a maniac with her new friend Isabel as she tortures a poor computer to death. But you know what? I really like that scene. It's weird and funny. Even Tobias Vaughan has a little chuckle at it. I'd actually go one further and say that the Isabel and Zoe stuff is really good fun. What on earth is she worrying about in that picture? No, I'm actually talking about the continuous exploits of the Doctor and Jamie escaping from the inept clutches of nonsensical mid-card supporting villain Packer in a variety of ways. Well, I say a variety. They visit the HQ, get booted out the building, then they come back, get kidnapped again, then get escorted to the factory. They escape from Packer just by pushing him over and tinkering with one of the lifts, a device that Packer just doesn't seem to understand. And so they end up on the roof, then they climb down, then they hop on a train where Jamie hides in a creepy box, then Unit sends a helicopter to the compound so they have to climb back on the roof, and yeah, they basically need new shoes by the end of it. Or a canoe. They actually return on a canoe at one point. And for audiences at the time, that bit of the story took a whole month to get through. At the end of episode 4, we get our first Cybermen reveal, and it's a whopper. Fun fact, episode 4 was transmitted on November 23rd, 1968, making it a 5th year anniversary Doctor Who special of sorts. And then episodes 5 and 6 are all about trying to figure out how and when the Cybermen are going to invade. By the end of episode 6, they've stormed the streets of London and shut down comms across the planet. And the problem with this is, well, nothing, I guess. Only that I feel ambition got the better of the writing on this story. I mean, how do you convey that the whole planet is in the Cybermen's clutches on a BBC budget in the 60s? Well, here's how. You tell, not show. The opposite of what writers of books tell you to do. Besides the clever editing of visuals, the invasion is conveyed by bits of dialogue such as these. We've seen literally hundreds of them coming out the sewers. The streets are packed with Cybermen. Radio communication is cut off across the world. There are thousands more in outer space. The Doctor needs to fight through 200 Cybermen. It's even stated that at some point an invasion fleet lands in Russia. And that's a story never explored. Lots of big numbers and plentiful amounts of military jargon in busy control rooms. Blips on radar. A shot of Brigadier doing his belt up. Corporal Benton dropping a cup. soldiers staring at a clock, and stock footage of ground missiles, some of which are implied to be in Russia, all done to keep the suspense high. Most of the final 2 eps during the Cybermen invasion consist of people talking in rooms, because actual visual conflict is sparse. What's wrong with this? Well, like I said, nothing. It's a fair enough way of doing it. Probably quite clever, all things considered, and these scenes are nicely produced with really decent sets. And you also get some cool shots of military bases to boot. But all in all, this is clearly a story out of its time zone. Look how achievable this is now. Back in the 60s, no dice. So they lean into suggestive dialogue in the same way they would if you were watching a play. And a lot of 60s Doctor Who was like that. It shows rather glaringly in places that they could not represent this story visually like they could with something like Tomb of the Cybermen, which showed and not told in every single respect. That is still one of the best Cybermen stories going. This, however, was a story essentially too big for its boots, but the makers of the story did their best with what they had at the time, and it appears that they pulled it off pretty efficiently. And it's still a really enjoyable watch, a heck of a lot more credible than how most people view its predecessor, The Wheel in Space. Big props to the music too, which is awesome. It was scored by Australian composer Don Harper, and is worlds apart from the recurring jingles of the first 3 cyber adventures and anything heard in Wheel in Space. Now, don't think for one second that I am criticising any of the music used in the previous Cybermen adventures, because I love those tunes. But this is just undeniably a step up. It was incidental music, custom composed for this story, and they even released the soundtrack as an album back in 2018. Some of the classiest compositions heard in black and white Doctor Who for my money interlay these musical numbers with the chilling, twangy sonic noises of ever-faithful Doctor Who soundman Brian Hodgson, including that computerist whirring noise, you know the one, and you have an all-round winner. Despite having no choice but to undersell its own story, the invasion still has all the hallmarks of a marvellous Kid Peddler creation. The Doctor's TARDIS is shot down by an object behind the moon, and on landing on Earth he finds that International Electronics is running the show, a tech giant which has implemented their devices pretty much everywhere. 10 million transistor radios sold apparently. Running the company is Tobias Vaughan, a marvellously charismatic heel portrayed in the grand tradition of stash-twirling Bond-style villains. He shouts as well as any Doctor Who character I've ever known. Seriously, the lungs on this guy when he's angry is something to behold. He is ably played by Kevin Stoney, who was previously used to great villainous effect in the Daleks' master plan. He's in league with the Cybermen through mutual agreement. He spikes his radios and military gear with micro-monolithic circuitry so that the Cybermen can hypnotically neutralize humanity at the time of their invasion. In return for helping them invade, Vaughan will be allowed to rule over the subjugated humans. Good luck with that. He has people positioned in high places and possesses his own suitably sinister private army, all under his hypnotic control, which means even UNIT are struggling to investigate him. Tobias Vaughan is a great character because his desire to rule comes from his own idea of order, not wildly dissimilar to the goal of the Cybermen, hence the cohesive relationship. In this story he has 2 different offices, both of which are identical because A, it solved a lot of problems for writers and production, and B, because of his love of uniformity and duplication. Later in the story, when the deal goes south and he gets double-crossed like we all knew he would, he pours his heart out complaining that the world ran by humans is a mess of uncoordinated ideals. Well, he's got that right. Whether he was ever a suitable candidate to fix that was debatable, but still. When he's not berating his private army or brainwashing his plants in the Ministry of Defence, or mercilessly executing those who have done him wrong, he's making heated negotiations with this, the Cyber Coordinator. Now listen, I like the weird light bulb thing in the Wheel in Space, but come on guys, this is the business. when Doctor Who prop building got it so right. It's complex, it lights up, it has moving parts, and most importantly, it's right there. Not an abstract cutaway, but right there in the room. And all the more credible for it. Look how big it is. It's one of my favourite things in the invasion, that hidden brain behind Cybermen coordination. There are some interesting morsels of detail given by the coordinator and Tobias regarding the early stages of the invasion, the stuff you don't see before this story takes place. Tobias Vaughan explains that he's been working with the Cybermen 5 years preparing for the invasion. Vaughan contacted them in deep space, provided the means by which they travel to Earth. Obviously, in return, they've propelled technological advancements in his company in the process. And I love how turbulent the relationship is between this thing and Tobias Vaughan. Every conversation is a battle of wills, and compromise is only met because one is trying to secretly deceive the other. Via the cyber transmitters planted in all his devices, humans will be under cyber control, and the suitable ones will be selected for conversion. Unsuitable ones will be destroyed, which goes against Vaughan's plan of ruling the subjugated populace. And more crucially for the eventual downfall of this invasion, Vaughan secretly plans to stop the Cybermen before they fully convert the human race, and so he builds a machine to control the Cybermen by manipulating their emotions, the Cerebratron. We see the Cerebratron in action. It's well dark. Remember that thing that they heavily allude to in World Enough and Time about the Cybermen feeling pain, just that they no longer care that that pain exists? It's no wonder that when Tobias cranks up the fear device, this poor number goes off on one, discharging a plethora of robotic screams, a horrific realization of what he actually is exploding through his mind. With this game of chess unfolding between the two main villains throughout this story, it is exciting to watch the build to the final episode. You get some good digging into what this new brand of Cybermen are all about. Each one is encased dormant in a crate, and it has the same cellophane qualities seen in their Tolossian tombs. You really don't want to be trapped inside one of these boxes. The Doctor and Jamie are quick to recognise these foes of old, even in their new appearance, with the Doctor having 4 previous encounters and Jamie clocking 3. At this point, the Doctor describes them as inhuman killers, which is sort of true. There's also a nice bit of continuity on the part of Zoe, who remembers the Cybermen are able to control people's minds as they did in the Wheel in Space. The firefight in the sewers put across how tough these Cybermen are, where a grenade takes out 2 but 1 survives. Unit bash this one repeatedly on its arm and send it packing back into the sewers before dropping a grenade on its head. Again, I think that's just about right. The first confirmed Cyberman kill of the invasion is this hapless Bobby, who screams like the best of them when the Cyberman killing it does a negative Dalek move from its chest plate. But they also have an assortment of guns. There's a lot of shots of them moving into position under the sewers, and at the end of episode 6, it's the iconic moment to end all moments. Followed by some eerily quiet shots of London, the micro-monolithic noises are discharged. Humanity falls victim to Cybermen hypnosis, and the Cybermen rise up from the sewers. What made all of these early Cybermen TV stories are the iconic moments, the robotic shapes walking along the snow, the dormant cyber army waking from their tombs, the sudden chilling reveal of a new cyber design, but none are more iconic than this, their uniformed march through the streets of London. St. Paul's Cathedral there, with a shrill cybernetic klaxon blaring in the background. A Cyberman invasion like you've never seen it before. Worth mentioning also, before you cuss me too much for saying that there was more invasion implied than what we saw, there were supposed to be shots of Cybermen outside of Hyde Park, Tower Bridge, the Houses of Parliament, and even them emerging from tube stations. Imagine how cool that would have looked. However, public crowdedness and lack of time meant that these things were not to be. Still, at least we got this much. Conceptually, I think it's awesome. For a solid episode, both Cybermen and Tobias Vaughan are running the show, with the Doctor and Unit making a desperate bid to liberate the planet. But even cooler still is how everything goes south for all parties in the very last episode. After a visit from the Doctor, and by the way, as you'd expect, the chemistry between the Doctor and Tobias is great, negotiations go south when Zoe uses her superior mathematical knowledge to put Unit's missiles on the right course. I I do like the designs on these spaceships, and I'm not knocking the production of the time here, far from it, but there is no way that these space shots are as good as the ones seen in the Moonbase or Wheel in Space. They're just not. However, the missiles hitting them and exploding is pretty cool. I mean, yeah, you see one or two of the little things ricochet when they probably weren't supposed to, but who cares? It's things blowing up, isn't it? Oh yeah, shout out to the Cybermats. There aren't any. I love a good Cybermat. But you don't really miss them in this story, what with them being a more trapped in a room horror kind of thing. That said, one or two roaming the sewers wouldn't have hurt. Tobias is fully against the Coordinator's newly implemented policy of destroying all life. The Coordinator says you are of no further use to us, and so Vaughn teams with the Doctor just as everything is thrown into chaos. Vaughn fires the Cerebratron machine at the Coordinator, blowing it to smoky smithereens. A pretty smart move to be fair, and done with the utmost rage. The human way. The Cybermen wipe out Vaughn's guards and storm the office in a chilling hostile takeover. And so we get to the party piece of the story, the battle. An actual battle that we see. It's great. On the subject of unit, they're pretty on the ball in this adventure. I can't really do one of those for this one, unless I talk about this guy running away and getting killed in the sewer. You also get the debut of Benton in his early corporal garb. Likewise, Lethbridge proves himself to be a solid supporting character through and through. A keeper, if you will. A dependable aid to the Doctor and his quest to do the right thing. Even if he does make the occasional bigoted anti-feminist cretinous remark. He still has a really pleasant working relationship with the Doctor, and it's not quite the at each other's throats kind seen in the later Pertwee stories. These cybers get taken out with a barrage of grenades and rockets in a genuinely exciting battle, while the Doctor and Tobias escape to the roof again, picking off Cybermen as they go, including this one who falls off a building to make a hell of a clunk on impact below. Tobias Vaughn is fully offed. Well, you turned out to be a more redeemable baddie than that Klieg fella, I'll give you that much. Obviously, I love the scene where Troughton jumps and yelps at the explosions flying up his backside. You know I do. It's a superbly done shot, and only recently did I realise that Vaughn's just hanging there in the background. With all negotiation collapsed, the Cybermen have switched their invasion scheme over to dropping a Cyber Megatron bomb on the Earth, killing everything on the surface, including their own troops. And this scheme is thwarted by a warhead supplied by UNIT, delivered to the Russians so they can attach it to one of their orbitals, thus firing it off into space and blowing up the bomb and the last of the fleet to Kingdom Come. Consider the invasion thwarted. And now, a bit of modelling. Had the Cyberman invasion gone to plan, that definitely wouldn't have been a thing anymore. What a glorious creation expanded media is. Those extra layers flung out to the wilderness for fans to find, adding depth and reason to the content that we already love, filling in the gaps with wondrous supposition. Thank the gods for the David Banks timeline, which brings newfound purpose to the events of the invasion, explaining that when thousands of years ago, when Mondas was cold and alone in the far reaches of space, a hardline faction of the population, more radical in their ideals to become fully cyber, made the bold step of leaving their dying world in order to tap a world richer in minerals, to build an army with the goal of invading Earth and cultivating a cyber race the right way, and thus priming the Earth for the eventual arrival of Mondas just a decade and a half down the line, so that the new and improved cyber faction could join forces with cyber Mondasians and establish the cyber race triumphant throughout the solar system. But we never got to see it, because it's Doctor Who, and the good guys win. The Cybermen book and the archive tapes also explains how the rest of Cybermen stemmed from this one invasion fleet, with some drifting off into space to become cyber nomads, and others hanging around by the moon to become later cyber faction and late cyber faction, eventually to be known also as Cyber Telosian. It all makes sense. Complex but sensical, and completely infallible in Doctor Who lore when...
So easy for him, isn't it? So easy for him just to sit in his chair, rattling off the names of planets with merry abandonment. Mondas. Sorry, stupid gate. Mondas. Telos. Marinus. What does that mean? And yeah, of course, Planet 14. Parallel evolution. Do you have any idea what you've done, Capaldi?
If you guys enjoyed this video, then check out my other video where I explain the David Banks timeline in more detail. And having covered that, it might just be better if I turn my attention to Planet 14, a small dot at the top of a book made 20 years after this story. A world which is implied but never seen. Not even a spinning upside down globe or a floating ball or anything. Everything you hear of this mysterious Planet 14 is from the Cyber Coordinator, who, let it be noted, confers to others of his kind during the invasion. A direct line to his home base. I wonder what they would have looked like. Possibly like this thing from a picture in the Cybermen book? A super Cyber Coordinator? Do we ever find out? The same coordinator also states that it knows the dangers of the Doctor and Jamie from a visit they made to Planet 14. Wait, what? What? How? When? Is this going to be one of those things when I dig deep into an expanded corner of Doctor Who to find that it isn't actually really expanded? Well, maybe. But that doesn't mean I won't find anything interesting along the way. I hope you can join me next time. Until then, this chimp has been chosen for cyber conversion. Have a good one.